Hey guys, welcome back. If you are new here, my name is Becca and today I have my best books of 2019. There is something that I have very recently, as in the day that I'm filming this, come to realise about my reading in 2019, and I am a little bit shocked. I have known for the past few months as I've been reading, I knew what books would be at the top of my best of list, and I'm pretty sure that you guys can probably predict them because they're the books that I talk about a lot and have been talking about a lot. But usually when I have made these videos in the years previous, this has been a top 10 video and I could only find 9 books that were worthy of being in this video, and the 9th one was one that I kind of threw in because I felt like I need to choose one book from a series that I've read this year that I did really enjoy. Something that you guys are also going to notice about this list is that it's weird. I constantly say that I'm predominantly a sci-fi and fantasy reader, but mainly fantasy. There's only 2 fantasy books on this entire list, and one of those ones is the one that's in at number 9 that I wasn't even going to include. So when I made this list, I did actually come to realize that in my most surprising, most disappointing, worst books and best books video, I have only actually spoken about 27 books, which means that I read 73 books in the year of 2019 that I did not feel particularly passionate about in any way. I'm not sure if that is an issue with me and my mental state, or whether that is an issue with the books that I've been reading. However, in 2020, I do aim to bring you a best of video with books that I am more passionate about, and it seems that I may be needing to read different fantasy than I am reading if only 2 of them have made it to this video. That being said, with me being predominantly a fantasy reader, it does take a little bit more for fantasy to impress me. So as I said, there are 9 books that I'm going to be talking to you guys about today. I have ranked them and we are going to be going from the number 9 slot up to my favourite book of the year. But it is worth noting that the best 3 are pretty much tied and interchangeable. I really love those 3 books that I read this year and I can't decide which one is my actual favourite. So coming in at number 9, we have A Dance with Dragons, Dreams and Dust by George R.R. Martin. This is very specifically a part 1 of A Dance with Dragons. In the UK, a couple of the A Song of Ice and Fire books are split into half books, I guess. And this is the first part of A Dance with Dragons, which I did enjoy more than the second half. This one is a little bit of a cheat, of course, because A Dance with Dragons was originally published as a full book. I'm sure you guys know I did host a read-along for the entire A Song of Ice and Fire series last year, and part 1 of A Dance with Dragons was my favourite. If you are unfamiliar, A Song of Ice and Fire is the book series that the TV show Game of Thrones is based on, which is an adult epic high fantasy multi-perspective political fantasy that also has magical aspects that are definitely more dominant towards the end of the books that have been published so far. Now, I did also really enjoy the first book, Game of Thrones, and I really liked A Feast for Crows. However, I feel like A Dance with Dragons Part 1 is my favourite installment in the entire series published so far, because when the TV show was being made, by the time they got to this part in the book series, they had started to diverge quite a bit. So a lot of the information in this book was new to me as I had previously watched the show, so it was a lot more interesting. As well as that, this first half of A Dance with Dragons does predominantly focus on the characters that have magical abilities, and because of that we get to know a lot more about the lore and the legend of the world and all the mythology and the old tales, which is pretty much what I enjoyed most about reading this series, because I do know the general plot from the show. It was all of the little bits of folk tales and things that I really found fascinating, because you don't get that in the TV show. At number 8, we have the only book on this list that I do not own a physical copy of. This was the group book for Ghibliathon and I read it on Scribd, and that is Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones. So we have a children's book in my favourites. So I did only read this because it was the group book, and Howl's Moving Castle is the book that the Ghibli movie Howl's Moving Castle was adapted from. So this story follows Sophie, who works in a hat shop, and she's pretty much committed to working there all her life. However, one day, due to a misunderstanding, the Witch of the Waste comes in and actually puts a curse on Sophie, which turns her into an old lady, and because of this, Sophie just suddenly decides that she is going to abandon her life and walk out into the hills to seek her fortune. When she is doing that, she does come across the notorious wizard Howl's Moving Castle. She asks for entrance so she can have shelter for the night, and from there she ends up embroiled in Howl's madness while she is trying to have the curse broken on herself. So the shining star of this story is of course Howl himself. He is flamboyant and sassy, and I really loved his character a whole lot. I also really like Diana Wynne Jones's writing style. It's a very whimsical writing style, and it's very much in a style style that you would read to a child, if that makes sense. I'm still not very good at describing this writing style, but it very much feels like a story, which I did really appreciate, and I just loved the whole atmosphere, and of course I love Howl, how could I not? Coming up in number 7 is the most underrated of the books on this list, and that is The Furies by Katie Lowe. Now, I originally read this as an ARC copy. I found it in a charity shop. I picked it up just because it was an ARC, because I'm often intrigued about these things. I didn't really think much of it, but Bookopoly made me read it, and I absolutely loved it. So in this story, we follow a girl whose father has died, and her family receive a large settlement from the accident that her father died in. Violet's mother convinces her that the best use of the money would be to send Violet to an exclusive all-girls private school, which Violet does reluctantly attend. However, when she is there, she's drawn in with this group of mysterious girls who are kind of outsiders, but in a cool way, and leading on from that, she does end up part of a secret society. This book is, I would say, predominantly a thriller, because right at the beginning of this book, you find out that a girl has died. This story is being told from the perspective of the main character in present day, but the bulk of the story does take place in the 90s in England. And the narrative of this story is recounting the year up to the death of the girl who is found on school property. Still, from that premise, I didn't expect much going into this. It's not my favorite type of story, but I found that I absolutely loved the atmosphere in this, and it is even crazier that I love this book so much, because I typically don't really like to read a lot of books set in England, because I find that they either fall under the umbrella of being really gritty or really quaint, and as somebody who actually is English, I find that neither of those portrayals are all that accurate. However, there were just so many things about this that I loved. Something that I did not expect going into this is that this is a dark academia story. I mean, I know that we have the private boarding school, but I thought it would very much focus on the murder, but there is the secret society aspect in there that leads to occult magic, which I really didn't expect. The way that I like to describe this book is that it is like The Craft but British, and I think that that is a pretty accurate representation in here. I mean, I was only born in the 90s, so I can't really say what it was like to be a teenager, but I do think life in England in the 90s is pretty accurately portrayed in here as well. All in all, I was just really surprised that I loved this book, and I found that even as time goes on, I still continually think about this book and what a gem it is. So if you have not picked up The Furies yet, then I would definitely recommend it. At number 6, we have The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. I did read the entire trilogy in 2019, but the first book still remains my favorite. Becky Chambers is a science fiction author that writes predominantly character-driven stories. All of the books in this series are companion novels, but they all kind of lead off a little bit from this first novel. Now, in this book, we follow a mishmash crew aboard the Wayfarer, and the Wayfarer is a spaceship that specializes in digging tunnels through space so that other crafts can move through space more quickly. There is a plot running through here where the crew have been offered this job of a lifetime that will pay them a hell of a lot of money to build this tunnel in a dangerous place, but this is predominantly about the relationship between the characters. This tackles a lot of poignant topics, things like racism, sexism, homophobia, because our main character in this book is Rosemary, who is a human from the Mars colony. She has taken this job on a whim, and because she has lived on Mars surrounded by humans, while she does know about other species, she hasn't come into contact with them that often, and so we learn a lot through Rosemary about the rest of the crew of this ship. Now, as I said, this tackles poignant topics, but I like the way that it does it because it does it in a sci-fi setting. So an example is that I said that this tackles racism, but in this story, race isn't an issue because the universe is so diverse. So different species stand in for different races, but the message is still very much the same. I don't really know how to describe my feelings towards this series, apart from that the books are just, I kind of want to say, comforting. They do have difficult topics in here, and with it being character driven, there are a lot of moments of high emotion, but I just find these books really soothing, even though the second one in particular does have some moments that are difficult to read. But I just find the range of topics that the books in this series, and this one in particular, tackles, it just left me feeling all warm and cozy, and I don't really know why, because as I said, not everything is sunshine and roses in these books. I just really like the way that this book made me feel, and also that it made me think, and I'm still thinking about aspects of this book now. Coming in at number 5, we have a book that I said was going to be my best book of the year at the time that I read it. As time has passed, I realized that it's not quite the best book that I read in 2019, and that is Orange by Ichigo Takano, specifically the first volume. So this is a manga. I started reading manga for the first time in 2019, and I really like it. In this story, we follow a girl who receives a letter from her future self that tells her that if she does does not change a few things, then a boy who has just transferred to her class will not be with them in a year. So this is pretty much a contemporary. It has slight science fiction aspects with the letter coming from the future, but this is very much a contemporary story. The thing that I really loved about this is the friendship elements in here. There is also romance that I didn't expect, and there is, I kid you not, the best love triangle that I have ever encountered in my entire life. And just the way that one of the characters deals with this love triangle just had me feeling all kinds of emotions, because it truly was beautiful, and that character I love with my entire heart and soul. But unlike probably the rest of the books in this list and the books we've talked about so far, this just made me feel happy. The friendship in this, the relationship, and the issues in here, I was just feeling all kinds of emotions all the time, and I would have died for these characters at the time that I read this. I'm sure you guys will know if you have been with my channel for quite some time, but this book does contain topics such as depression and suicide as well, and the way that they are handled is not done in the best way. However, this is a book written by somebody who is from a very different culture to ours, and I think that considering that cultural difference, the fact that mental health is being addressed in this series at all is a massive plus. So please be careful if you are triggered by any mentions of depression and suicide and you want to read this, but I would definitely recommend it because it's just, it warmed my cold dead heart. I'm ready for you all to be shocked because at number 4, Dark Dawn by J. Kristoff, which I'm sure a lot of you guys would have thought was my number 1, but it's not. So this is the final book in one of my favorite series in the entire world, the Nevernight Chronicle, and in that series we follow 16-year-old Mia, whose father has been hung for treason and whose mother has been imprisoned. And when this was all happening, Mia ran away and was taken in by a man called Mercurio, who owned a curio shop, and he pretty much prepared her for entrance into the Red Church, which is a very high regarded group of assassins. So this series follows Mia through her journey, starting off with her heading off to assassin school. This was the final book. It was pushed back a year. It was supposed to be out last year and it wasn't. Finally got our hands on it this year. I gave this 5 stars. I loved this with all my heart. You guys know I think J. Kristoff is a master storyteller. I like how he does things a little bit differently, like we have the breaking of the fourth wall in here and he pokes fun at himself. It gets very meta in points. I love the way that he makes me feel about characters, because I have found recently that in adult or new adult fantasy stories you just don't feel as connected to the characters because it tends to be more about the plot, or you have a very large cast of characters so it's hard to spend time with all of them. And I do think that that is an issue with why there aren't that many fantasy books on my best list. I need to feel a little bit of emotion, or I need to be attached to something in the story for it to be one of my favorites. So I really like how J. Kristoff has blended both characters that you really care about with a high action, complicated fantasy plot. It's even more amazing that he does that because Mia is essentially an unlikable character. She is a true Gryffindor. She does whatever the fuck she wants to do, like regardless of the consequences. She's just going around murdering people, doing whatever the hell she wants to her own ends, but I still love her with all of my heart and soul. So the reason that this is number 4 on this list is partially I think I've realized that the first book in a series always has the most impact on me. So the next 3 books we have are all first books in series. I am a very biased reader when it comes to this series because I have been anticipating this for so damn long. So there were elements of this that were a little bit fan servicey, and if I was not so biased I would have maybe given this a lower rating. However, I do feel like another key aspect to why this is not higher on my list is that I have this thing when it comes to the last book in a series, especially a series like this where I know that people are going to die and I'm just so nervous about these things happening that I put the book off for as long as possible, and then when I do read it I am so anxious when I'm reading it that I don't really enjoy it. So this is a book that I definitely need to reread at some point when I pretty much know what's happening and I can enjoy it a little bit better without just being constantly on edge. I do love this book absolutely with my whole heart. Just didn't have a great reading experience because of my own feelings, and if I wasn't biased I may not have rated it as highly as I did. It would still have gotten at least 4 stars, I can tell you that, but it maybe wouldn't have been a full 5. And now for the top 3, my top 3 books of 2019. Please bear in mind that these are pretty interchangeable. These are equally all my 3 favorite books of 2019, but at the moment, how I'm feeling right in this second, this is the order that I would put them in. So number 3 on this list is Scythe by Neil Shusterman. You guys know I love this book. This is the first book in a young adult utopian series that takes place in a world where where humanity has conquered absolutely everything, including death. The only thing that they can't seem to manage is population control. So they do have an organization of Scythes whose job it is to decide who lives and dies. Now in this story we do follow two apprentice Scythes, Citra and Rowan, who have both been reluctantly recruited to the Scythedom. Very quickly in this book we find out that there are many different aspects to the Scythedom, and Citra and Rowan quickly end up on completely different paths. Now the reason that the first book in this series is my favourite is because my favourite thing about this is the world. I think Neil Shusterman did a really great job building this really complex world where everything kind of makes sense. He's one of those authors, kind of like J. Kristoff, that will give you answers to things that you realise that you weren't even wondering. His world is just that complex and that well thought out. The books in this series are incredibly fast paced. This is a very plot driven story, which is really amazing to me that it is one of my best books of 2019. I don't necessarily need a predominantly character driven story, but I do tend to really like really good characters, and I think in this series the characters definitely do pale in comparison to the world and the plot. One of the things that I also particularly liked about this is that it just would not leave my mind when I had finished reading it. It's one of those series that I could have very much happily binge read, which is something that I don't do anymore because I tend to find that if I spend too long in a world with consecutive books, then I do tend to get a little bit bored of them. But there's just so much happening in here. It's so fast paced and there is so much depth that I really just could not get enough. I think one of the reasons that this very plot driven story really works for me as well is that I'm not a huge fan of action scenes, but Neil Shusterman has taught me that maybe I haven't read that many really well written action scenes, because I think Neil Shusterman does a really good job at writing them, and I found that I was really enjoying those moments when I don't usually in other books. These books are also really cinematic. Like I said, Neil Shusterman, great job on the action scenes, and I feel that you can really picture them in your mind, and I think that a TV show in the Scythedom would be absolutely fantastic, because reading this book is just such an immersive experience that I think would really translate well to television. Okay guys, have you guessed what number 2 is? Number 2 is Illuminate by J. Kristoff and Amy Kaufman, with the disclaimer that it could possibly be Gemina, because I found that I enjoyed both of them equally, but I prefer the plot in this one, but the characters in Gemina, so I'm not sure which one's my favourite overall. So this is the first book in the Illuminate files, which is a young adult science fiction series that follows different characters in every book that are all connected to an overarching plot. Now in this book we follow Katie and Ezra, who are two teenagers who have just broken up when their planet is attacked. They do both evacuate onto this fleet of survivors. However, the main ship in the survivor fleet is heavily damaged, which means that it cannot move very quickly through space, and they are being pursued by one of the ships that attacked them. So this is mixed media, as I'm sure you guys know. I did listen to the audiobook and read this at the same time, and that creates a completely immersive experience. So if you do want to read this series, would definitely recommend that route, because the audiobook is full cast with sound effects and everything. The one thing I 100% did not expect when I was going into this is that it would contain some aspects of the horror genre. I think that actually may be just because I have read the book and listened at the same time, because I think it is the audiobook that really builds that tension. But throughout this book we have various countdowns, and it really sets you on edge as you are moving towards these big things happening. As well as that, there is an aspect in here that reminds me a lot of the horror movie 28 Days Later, which nobody ever mentions when they talk about this book. So when I got to that bit, I was completely surprised. Character wise, this is like typical young adult. We have a pair of angsty teenagers trying to save the world, but I just think that the unique multimedia aspect, the fantastic audiobook quality, those unexpected horror aspects, and the way tension is built through this book just made it absolutely fantastic, and I cannot wait to get to Obsidio. So my best book of 2019 is a really weird one. Nobody's more shocked than me, okay guys, but I just cannot stop thinking about this book, and whenever anybody mentions it, my immediate response is just, I love that book so fucking much. It's You by Caroline Kepnes, and I cannot believe that I am standing here in 2019 telling you guys that a thriller is my best book of the year, and not even a new thriller. I don't know what happened. So you guys may be familiar with this book from the Netflix show, if not the book. I do think that the book is better. I haven't seen season 2 of the show yet, but I have read the sequel, and while I didn't enjoy that as much as the first book, I still really enjoyed it. So in You, we follow a young man called Joe who is very mild-mannered. He's very charismatic. He's a sensitive boy boy, shall we say. He loves to read, he keeps himself to himself, he works in a bookstore, he's romantic, he's sweet, everything you could ask for, right? Maybe, until a young woman called Becca walks into the bookstore where he works one day, and he quickly becomes infatuated and obsessed with her and starts to stalk her. So obviously I just said all those things about Joe being sweet and romantic. I'm obviously intelligent enough to realize that Joe is in fact a stalker and is not a great person to hang around. So that's not the reason why I love this book. I mean, I do love Joe, like, don't get me wrong, I do. But the reason that I love this book so much is that it is so fascinating. In this book, you are in Joe's head the entire time as he is going out of his way, doing these crazy things and stalking this girl. So the way that this book is written, it is as if he is talking to Beck, or possibly as if he is talking to you. So it's like, I watched you across the street, I watched you undress in your window and things like that, which definitely adds a creep factor. And while I did not listen to it on audiobook, I do believe that the audiobook for this is good. So the way that this narrative works is that it causes you to sympathize with Joe, and you understand his point, you understand his motives for what he's doing, and some of the things he says and does can be really relatable. It's just he goes to such an extreme with them. But the thing that I really loved about this story is, like I said, you feel for Joe, you are in his head, you are on his side as he is doing these appalling things. And what makes it a little bit more complicated as well is that Beck is not a great person. Does she deserve to be stalked and have happened to her what happens in this book? Absolutely not. But she's not a likable person, which puts you even more firmly in Joe's camp. So I guess the reason why this is my favorite book of the year is that I really loved reading it. I cannot get this book out of my head, and I just find it absolutely fascinating and so well done how this can put a reasonably minded person like myself in the position of a stalker and get me to sympathize with them so wholeheartedly. I do know that a lot of people don't like this book, and I know that it is very polarizing, and I completely understand why, but I am about as obsessed with this book as Joe is with Beck, and I cannot wait for the third book to be released whenever that may be. So that is it for my best books of 2019. This was a weird one, I know, but it is what it is, guys. So this is the last video in my best of, worst of kind of series I'm doing. I do have a couple of more end of year videos to come, but now you know all of my most disappointing, most surprising, worst and best books of 2019. Please let me know what your guys' best book of 2019 was, because I really would like to know. And please also don't forget to like this video if you liked it, and subscribe if you want to. If you head into my description box, you'll find a link to my Goodreads, Instagram, Twitter if you'd like to follow me on any of those, as well as a link to my Bookish body butter and candle website, the Instagram for that, and a 10% off discount code. That's it from me today, guys. Bye.
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you'll go where nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.